Cynthia Hansen, great to have you here today.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you.
So excited about this conversation and also just really catching up with you on some of the work that you've been doing so far. And yeah, really looking forward to sharing some of your wisdom and knowledge around innovation, creating scale, culture, and learning a little bit more about what is your main passion. So again, thanks for being here.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Fantastic. Well, why don't we just take it from the top? So, one of the things that I noticed, although you're leading a big part and a really important part of Innovation Foundation today, and you're based out in Switzerland, you started in Japan as a teacher.
Yes, indeed.
So,
Yeah, that was a couple jobs in.
right, yeah. So tell me, how do you move from being a teacher in Japan all the way through to leading an innovation unit for one of the largest organizations in the world today? So tell me a little bit about that journey.
Sure. So it's not a straightforward path, which actually I think makes it more interesting. And this is often something I talk about with people that I mentor, that you don't necessarily know where you're going to end up. And it's that comfort with ambiguity that makes it a really interesting ride. So actually, even before teaching in Japan, when I finished university, I spent about a year running the back office of a small design firm, which was a
Wow,
fascinating look into how you run a small business and actually what was exciting and what was scary about running a small business. So that was a great way to just jump into the business world and be responsible for everything from payroll to taxes to advertising to everything. And so that was a fun leap from there into then teaching in Japan, which was totally different. So that was part of the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, which is actually under the Japanese government. They take people from all over the world and place them in Japanese schools to team teach alongside Japanese teachers with the idea of giving cultural context to language learning. So it's not just something you memorize out of a textbook,
yeah,
but something that you do live, which was really fun.
really interesting. You may or may not know this, but my cousin's in Japan. So I
Oh,
have,
really?
yeah, he's been there for just over 11 years now. So a big part of my family is Japanese now. So he's got four
Oh,
kids. So I've been there a few times, not only to Tokyo, but down to Fukuoka, Tamagashima, and a few other areas as well. So yeah, really interesting. And so you mentioned that you got involved in small business early and you had an idea of how everything worked inside a company. Tell me a little bit more about that experience. How do you think that's helped you to set yourself up for what you're working on today, even?
so I think actually having that insight into small business made me think a lot about strategy. If you're a very small business, so this was basically a one-woman show whose office I ran, and then she worked with some external providers. But the idea was there was no slack. You
Yeah,
had to be responsible for everything. So it meant that you had to learn how to do everything up to a manageable level. So what I learned there was to plan really well, to be strategic, to use the resources to accomplish what needed to be done, not waste anything, and to just really focus on the few things that were going to move the business forward.
yeah,
And I think that actually served me then in every job I had after that. So when I try to explain to people what my career trajectory has been, it's been primarily around startup, scale up, or turnaround. And all of those have things in common in that you have to be really clear what you're trying to achieve. You have to marshal really limited resources and then focus in on the few things that are going to make a difference.
yeah. No, got it. And when you say no slack, you don't mean the tool. You mean the fact that the business is lean, right?
The business is very lean.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So everybody's kind of chipping in into certain areas, and it gives you a wider overview. So teaching in Japan, also having an overview of small business, and then what was the next journey for you after that?
Yeah. So when I came back from Japan, I knew I did not want to be a teacher.
Right.
But B, I knew that I wanted to do something that was related to connecting people and the idea of building bridges. And so I actually went to work for an international teacher exchange program, which was the chance to be on the opposite side of basically the same relationship. So I
Right.
had gone to Japan as a teacher, as an exchange teacher, and had been handheld by an amazing program. Then I went to work for a program that was bringing teachers from all over the world into the US. So it's completely on the other side. And
Interesting.
it gave me this sense of what does it take to run a program like that? And what works and what doesn't work? And how do you learn along the way?
So this again, this is like a variety of different types of experiences, and like you said at the start, it wasn't a straight path. And so then after you done that, and obviously we've had discussions around this, you were working for WEF at some point a little bit later down in the journey. Was that right after, or were there steps in between that?
There were a couple steps in between.
Yeah.
So when I left the teacher exchange program, I wanted to stay in exchange and the idea of citizen exchange.
Yeah.
So I went to work for a public-private partnership, which was really interesting because it was the first time I got to work really directly with government. So that program is a US State Department program called the International Visitor Program. And it brings high-level professional exchange participants to the US,
Yeah.
introduces them to their professional counterparts with the idea that they build bridges. So, you come as a doctor, a lawyer, a researcher, an entrepreneur, a tech expert, and you come to the US and you get connected with your counterparts.
Got it.
So I ran that for a few years, which also kind of built my belief that actually you needed to connect people and find ways to kind of build commonality across people, across cultures, across experiences. But it was also another case of turning something around that was pretty good, but actually could be a lot better and that had some holes in it.
Yeah.
And so, again, it was looking at what I had to play with, figuring out what could be different or be better, figuring out a strategy, and then being really lean and kind of agile along the way to make it better. And
But
so each of these things ended up being pretty fundamentally different from what they were in the beginning.
what so you mentioned something there that's really interesting, and just being in the world of diversity and inclusion, we often think about diversity as the differences. And you talked about commonalities. Tell me a little bit more about why you think that's important as far as finding commonalities and what you've learned from approaching business in that way.
So I think commonalities are a little bit of a double-edged sword. I think they are amazing when you find something that you can connect with somebody about. And if you're really good, you can connect with anybody. So
Right.
you find something that's in common, something that you care about, something that's a common goal. And that's how you can mobilize people. But at the same time, you can have kind of fake commonalities. So
Yeah.
I've worked in a number of places, I'm sure you have as well, where, yes, you have diversity and inclusion. On the surface, you have, people with different skin colors or different genders or different ages. But when you scratch the surface, they're all from the same universities. They're all from the same social strata. They all come from the same kind of basic business mindset. So what you're missing there is that cognitive diversity. So yes, you can have commonality, but the commonality might actually be kind of papering over the fact that you don't have enough diversity to actually be innovative, to be provocative, to stretch people's thinking, and therefore to have a richer kind of result.
So do you think about diversity not only, as you mentioned, being something that is visual that we can see, but it's also around the talents, information, background, and experience that's hidden?
Very much so. And you're right when you say that it's hidden, because so often there are people with transversal skills, with transferable skills, who may not even know that they have those. And quite often, the thing that's a barrier is having employers or even hiring managers at that level who are willing to take a chance on a non-traditional candidate.
Right.
So, for example, when I was at the World Economic Forum, I needed a new team coordinator. So this is sort of an admin plus kind of role about processes and systems improvement and things.
Sure.
And I did a search, and the World Economic Forum tends to attract lots of really bright young people with master's degrees who are looking for a foot in the door, and they may or may not stay in that kind of entry level position because they're often looking to move up.
Right.
But I had this fantastic woman apply who actually was a little bit older, a bit more experienced, had about 10 years of work experience, and she came out of hotel management. And she had never worked in the kind of corporate setting that the World Economic Forum offered. And she didn't have any admin work, but she had run a budget, she had run a team, she knew how to deal with the public, she knew how to troubleshoot, she could solve problems. She was always calm and utterly professional. And she was the best team coordinator I ever hired. She was amazing. But she wouldn't have got through a traditional screening. She now, in this day and age, probably wouldn't have gone through. AI algorithms would have screened her out. And so it's just a matter of looking for those transferable skills and being willing to take a chance on the person.
Why did you take a chance? What was motivating you to take a chance on that person?
She impressed me because she was very upfront about what she had and what she didn't have, and why she was willing to learn, and what was trainable
And
about her.
how does she get to your quote unquote doorstep, so to speak? How did you find her in the first place if she wouldn't have passed through the screening?
So at that point, she did come through in the long list of applicants that I got from HR,
Right.
but she wasn't put forward as one of the top applicants.
Got it.
So I only found her because I read all of the applications.
Okay. Okay. So that's another point as well. Also making sure that people are a little bit more diligent when someone applies for a role, they've taken their time in order to do that. And I think that's something that HR finds a little bit challenging, especially in the current market where they get overwhelmed with a lot of applications. And then it's like, how do you sort through? Do you have a way of doing that you think about where there's a way for you to sort through initially? Like what's like a complete yes and a complete no when you glance on a resume?
One of the things that I really look for is, did that person create impact in the
It,
last job?
yeah.
What I don't want is a laundry list of, I'm Marcus and I did these 15 things in that job. What I want is, I saw a problem, I took this action, this is how it was different by the time I left.
Yeah. Yeah.
And very few people do that. And so either I look for someone who has framed it in that way, not in a self promotional way, but in a here's the impact way, or someone who has experiences that show the ability to learn, and a growth mindset, an agile mindset, because you can't train those things as easily as you can hard skills. I don't care if you're an Excel whiz. I care that you can look at information, look for the gaps, and come to me with a set of problems and solutions.
Yeah, got it. So again, so kind of on competencies and traits and capacity, curiosity, those types of things, and we talk about, and I talk about that a lot, because sometimes people don't get the chance or the opportunity to display those. So thinking about kind of bringing you towards the present day now, and in the way that you look at resumes, you look for problem solvers, and you're really trying to tackle some of the biggest problems that exist today. So tell me and the audiences a little bit more about like what you're working on right now and what the Innovation Foundation actually is.
So the Innovation Foundation is the corporate foundation of the Adecco Group. So we are a corporate foundation in terms of the way we're set up and the way we're governed, but we operate really at the farthest fringes of what a corporate foundation can be, at least in Switzerland. So we've set ourselves up as a social innovation lab. So we're not a granting foundation. We're not a typical programming foundation. So we don't give away money. We don't just run programs. What we do instead is we look for who's falling out of the workforce. Why are they falling out of the workforce? So that's our scanning process. Then we bring together the right players, including end users, to build solutions, like real solutions to the problems that we've identified. And that's the build phase. And then we take those most promising solutions and we build them into products. And that's the scale phase.
Got it.
And so it's really about seeing a problem, working with the right actors to come up with a solution, and then building that solution into something that is viable and go out into the world, and exit the foundation. So it doesn't need to sit with us.
Yeah.
And it's really, that's the magic formula.
And so what would be an example of a problem that you've been working on that has, in your opinion and the opinion of others, had a significant impact?
So we're still along the journey,
Yeah.
but the project that was furthest along right now is one we're doing in Mexico, where we wanted to tackle the problem of youth and youth who are not in employment, education, or training, youth who have basically fallen out of the system.
Right.
And so we looked at young people who are not in school, not in work, living at or below the poverty line on the urban fringe. And then we looked even more deeply at young mothers because they don't have a lot of time, they have a lot of resource constraints. And we looked at what are the real problems? Why are they so far away from work? And in that case, in the context of these young mothers living out of the below the poverty line in Mexico, they were being told that by getting pregnant young, usually single, they had completely ruined their lives and any chance of not only having a job, but having a career.
Who tells them
And
this? Who's been saying
uh,
that to them?
they were being told this by teachers, by members of
Wow.
their community, by members of their family, by potential employers, basically by everybody. And
Wow.
they just felt that they didn't know who to trust. They didn't know what information was correct. And nobody was giving them hope, let alone a roadmap for how they could even think about work. So for a lot of them, they weren't even thinking about any kind of job. Maybe some sort of informal job, like I
Sure.
could be a cook, I could be a cleaner. Those are the options that were being offered to them.
Wow. And the reason behind that is like, why is that happening? Is
Yeah,
it, yeah,
part of it is pretty conservative culture. Some of it is the influence of Catholicism. Certainly, that's changed over time.
yeah,
And I think from what we heard from them, some of it is a sense of punishment. Like this is your choice. You made this choice, and therefore this is
wow,
your punishment that you are going to. They even were being told things like, "You are just a mother. That's your life forever. You will just be a mother," as if being a mother was somehow not enough, and even more horribly, the idea that being a mother was some kind of punishment.
wow. So focusing on really bringing some of those people into the workforce in a meaningful way, I imagine that will have a significant amount of impact on themselves, like personally, confidence, the family. There'll be representation as well, right? Where you start to see others that are doing something that's not just, as they say, just right, doing
Exactly.
what people say, what people expect you to do based on your environment. Yeah, that's super impactful. So a lot of the work that you're doing is it's really tackling big problems.
Mhm.
What's the biggest challenge that you come across like in your work, whether that's internally or externally? What's like the hardest thing to overcome to get this kind of work done? Because it's not easy.
It is definitely not easy. And I think the biggest problem is scale.
Mm,
So once we've worked in this case with the young mothers and with NGOs and experts and tech companies on the ground to come up with a handful of solutions, okay, we have these solutions. Now we're going to build them out. So we've gone through scan, we've gone through build to come up with the solutions, and now we're into scale. And scale is basically building them out into viable products that one of the partners will take forward. That's where it's tricky. You don't know, like any kind of accelerator, any kind of incubator, you don't know if what you're building is
right.
really going to be successful. So we've got two venture teams going right now. They're actually on the ground in Mexico this week.
Nice.
One of them is building a social campaign. And this is based around credible information for these girls from someone who looks like them, sounds like them. Not some distant government official, but someone from the community, someone who's had a similar lived experience. So that's what they need is someone to tell them in a guiding and peer sort of way, this is possible. You could have a job. You could have a future in the world of work. So that's one of the tech solution or one of the solutions. The other one is a tech solution that is based on technology that will translate your lived experience into employable skills, things that will be recognized in the job market.
Amazing.
And
So it's not just
yeah,
so it's not just looking at your work history. It's taking what you've learned from just being able to live and survive and thrive
exactly.
in some cases. That's really interesting. And
Because
that,
they
those,
don't have a work experience. They have no work experience. If you have nothing that
yeah,
would show up in a nutritional CD,
yeah,
how can you have confidence that you've got something to bring to the table?
yeah. Super interesting. So some of the challenges you mentioned, kind of getting scale and driving, I suppose, these solutions, not in just one area, but in multiple areas. How do you think you'll go about tackling that moving forward? What are some of the ideas that you've had, or are there any calls to action for people listening to this, or maybe where they could support?
Sure. So the idea is that by the time we get to the end of the second sprint, we've got a couple of really viable products that will probably be taken forward by one of the partners in the project. The idea is, so say you take the campaign, we'll scale that campaign in Mexico. And if it works in Mexico, we'll look at how you would need to tweak it to take it out into other Latin American countries. The other thing we'll do after we've tested it in several markets is look at what other communities or what other target audiences might that be beneficial for? Why could you not take that idea of someone who looks like me, sounds like me, and apply it to indigenous communities?
Right.
Could you do it for youth offenders? Could you do it for older people trying to come back into the workforce? You could do it for all different communities where the thing that's lacking is confirmation from someone who looks like me, sounds like me, that it can actually be done, that I can imagine that kind of future for myself. That's got almost limitless possibilities. So, what we'll be looking for then is other organizations, other people who have a foothold in different communities who would be willing to take that and test it out and see if it has legs.
Yeah, I got it. So from what you said earlier as well, connections are a big part of what you do. And I imagine in this world, part of driving these solutions is ensuring that you've got the right places to connect people to once you have maybe helped them, whether it's get that confidence, understand what their skills are, and being able to market those skills. How do you go about building connections, and why are connections so important if you believe they are?
I think it comes back to this idea of being anchored. So with these young women, they've got amazing resources in their own communities. The idea is not to pull them out of the community and point them to some online training by somebody in Switzerland, but actually to reconnect them with the resources that are in their community, role models, mentors, teachers, other people. So in order to do that in a credible way, it means that we need to build those relationships, and we need to do it coming through people who are already in the communities. So with the piece in Mexico, we've partnered with two amazing NGOs. One is Plan International, who has a really good foothold in Mexico, and the other one is Youth Build Mexico. That's a network of NGOs working specifically on youth and employment. So those are the folks who are on the ground, who understand the context much better than we could, who have the connections, who can bring in people from government, business, civil society, can bring in the young mothers on the ground in a totally credible and inclusive way. We could never do this
Yeah,
without those partners, but you have to be careful about the partners and why they're in it, that they're in it for the right reason.
right, right. And so one of the things you mentioned was obviously around the mentors. So if just switching gears slightly, who've been some of the big mentors for you that have helped you to get to where you are, and what did they provide, do you think, in terms of helping you achieve some of the goals that you've had?
I've been lucky to have some really amazing mentors, and some of them have been direct bosses, others have been people external. I think you need a mix of both. So actually, one of the bosses that has been an ongoing mentor as well is Pierce Cumberledge, who for whom I worked at the World Economic Forum, and he was amazing because he he helped me to refine what my own vision was and what my goals were, and then he got out of the way and
Yeah,
he gave me air cover where I needed it. He gave me profile where it would be helpful, but he didn't micromanage or step in where he wasn't helpful. And so I try to replicate that with my own teams as much as I can. So I think that was a really good example of someone who was a more hands-on mentor. And and then I've had as an ongoing mentor for many years Peter Grauer, who's the chairman of Bloomberg, and who has been fantastic in terms of giving me a really macro view of the world of business and where decision making happens at the world of business. And then also, some of the challenges that people at the very top really struggle with. And he's also been great about listening to me and what I'm trying to achieve, and then opening doors and making connections with people that he thinks could not only be helpful, but actually kind of steer my thinking in a different way.
Yeah,
Open up that idea of cognitive diversity, people that I would never have met otherwise,
sure.
who can really contribute to thinking and decision making at that level too.
Really interesting. So you've had, as you mentioned, some fantastic mentors, have been able to, I suppose, provide perspective from different lenses, also challenge your thinking, but give you that space, right? And so thinking about organizations and some of the work that you're doing, I suppose, as part of a bigger organization, but outside of it, you must see things that companies could bring in to their organizations in order to enhance their culture and have a culture where it ultimately, and talk about D and I as a superpower, but a culture that empowers their business to thrive and the individuals to thrive. What are maybe one or two things that you think companies should be doing more of, or even doing well today, that are worth mentioning?
I think the ability to mirror at the top the mix that you want, and ideally to mirror your stakeholder mix, is huge. And I don't think many organizations actually do that. I think that's the ultimate of walking the talk. If your board, if your executive team really mirrors who your stakeholders are, I think that goes an enormous way. And so I think that's one. I think another piece is about building pipeline. And I get really tired of the complaint, there aren't enough women, there aren't enough people of color, there aren't enough people with disabilities, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
And you're not looking hard enough. There
yeah,
are lots of amazingly talented people out there. You just have to change the way you're looking. And you have to be a truly welcoming place to work, or else those people are just not going to take the time to look at you as an employer. So I
absolutely.
think they've got to change that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the people exist. I mean, was it 7 point what billion people in the world
Hmm.
today? And you're telling me that you can't find diverse talent. Now,
Exactly.
it's there's a business there, right? It's a good, decent business for us because we can help you get access to that talent. But I think what you've mentioned is really important, is how you perceive
Hmm.
the talent, the
Hmm.
perception, and what you're looking for when you're hiring, like the example of the person that you'd hired inside the organization previously. The background, I think, gives you some context to some experience, but it's all about competencies and traits, really. And
Exactly. And trainability.
yeah, yeah, you mentioned that earlier, and I think that's a great one. Curiosity, trainability, be a bit willing to learn as well,
That's
right?
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that mindset. It's very hard to train mindset.
Yeah, yeah, and I've seen it a lot with athletes in particular who have a specific type of mindset where they're disciplined, dedicated, understand that they're in competition when they're in business. So that's another area. And I know you've done some work in that field as well,
Hmm.
right? We were
Hmm.
talking about that a few years ago. Are you still doing things in that space, or is it a bit more focused on some of the projects that you mentioned before?
So what we've actually done is take the curriculum that we had developed for athletes and figure out where else could it be
Right.
applied, which is that idea of transversality that I absolutely love. So we had done that piece of work that you remember, which was about codifying the 8 traits that athletes bring, where that actually are then directly applicable to the world of business.
What
But
are
then
some
we
of those
took,
traits? That's
yeah,
I have to jump in there. So you've got to give me some of those traits.
sure.
I'm not going to ask you for all eight, at least four.
So it's the ability to give and receive feedback.
Yep.
the ability to be self-disciplined and goal-oriented,
Yep.
the ability to basically promote yourself and kind of market yourself is important because it means that you can frame the skills that you have and convince somebody of it. And then to be a team player as well, to understand how you fit within a team is
Yep.
really key. So those were really some of the top ones that we had pulled out.
It's interesting. A few weeks ago, I was in Austin and I was in the hotel lobby. I was at the bar watching, I can't remember, I was watching one of the basketball games. And then somebody sat next to me and they were talking to someone else and they mentioned that they're a commentator. So they're a commentator for ESPN now. But historically, they've been a professional volleyball player for like 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So we had that conversation of the transition even into the business world because now ESPN is a corporation. Obviously, it's different
Mm-hmm.
in a sense that there's a sports focus. But the thing that you mentioned around being able to give and receive feedback, I think that is really, really important. And I think that gets overlooked. And feedback is a gift. And obviously, it's sometimes hard to take. And in the sports world, you want to get feedback from people that you respect. That's another
Mm-hmm.
thing. You don't just take feedback from fans. If you took feedback from fans all the time and you're playing in front of 50,000 people, that's hard. But I think inside of an organization, being able to deliver that feedback in a way that will land so people can understand and go away and train is super important.
I think the parallel piece there is being able to critique your own performance. Think about how
Yeah,
much professional athletes, watch, recordings of themselves. They analyze everything that they've done. They look at what could have been different, what could have been better. They do the mental training. They replay matches or races in their heads. They they run through them before the competition. So all of that is amazing in terms of being able to look at your own performance and then figure out what you do to make it better.
yeah.
Lots of people don't do that.
Really insightful. I think just having that having that ability to reflect
Mm-hmm.
is so important because then you can then kind of change things, move forward, and then start to transform. So what's the one thing about your job that you do today that you love? Because every time I see you've got a
Uh,
smile on your face, so there must be something that you love around your job.
I love being able to build.
Yeah,
This is when I do the reflection on what I've liked best about the jobs I've had over time. It's that ability to build, which is not just building stuff, but it's building with people for people. So that's the best part of my job is figuring out what do we want to change? What should be different in the world? Who do we need to marshal and what resources do we need? Human, social, financial, what kind of resources to make that happen? Then how do you bring people together, create the right mix and the right environment so that magic happens?
yeah.
And it's that hope that magic happens that makes me so happy about this job. That's why I love what I do.
And is that what makes the foundation magical itself? That hope?
I think so. I think so.
Yeah,
We're truly doing something that no one else is doing out of a corporate foundation. No one is doing it in this particular way. We've learned from lots of other models. We're not
sure.
making up anything from scratch, but it's just that it's like a slightly different recipe that's going to have a different result. And
Yeah,
I love the freedom also to just play and create things. And it won't all work, and that's okay. But just the luxury of being able to do that within the environment of a big organization and an organization that's willing to take that kind of risk, a board that's willing to take that kind of risk is just heavenly.
yeah. Yeah, we've actually covered a lot of ground, and I'm thinking as we're having this conversation, obviously, but some of the things that I think are super important, as you mentioned, like mirroring at the top. I did have a question on that because, as you said that, how do you mirror right at the top when maybe, as you said earlier, people don't have that experience? Is it about companies taking more chances on those that might not have that experience, either in a board level and giving them that opportunity? Do you think that's going to be more beneficial for organizations if they do that in that way, or is it another approach?
I think it's a yes and. I think if you get the right person who has enough of the trainable and transferable skills, take a chance on that person, particularly maybe in a board role, where what you want is that different perspective and the different kind of skills and competencies. But in maybe a more operational role, then I think a lot of it is building the right pipeline so
Yeah.
that you're training the types of people that you want and giving people at kind of mid-level the chance to really stretch and do something different. So one of the things we've just piloted now is actually secondment. So that as we put together those venture teams, we're opening this up to pull people in from different parts of the Adecco group to work with us for 6 months. Get that experience of working in a venture team, building something new, and working in an environment that has a lot of ambiguity, working in a not-for-profit environment as well. And for many people who have gone a very standard business track, that's completely out of your
Yeah,
comfort zone. So
absolutely.
if we can do that and then send people back to the teams where from that we borrowed them from, then that's great. We're seeding the rest of the company with this kind of mindset, this kind of behavior, this way of working. So that's something that I think we can add value to the company and stretch the company and build the pipeline of people who will think differently that ultimately will rise to the top.
Yeah. Wow. So again, we've covered a lot of ground. We're kind of coming up to the tail end of optimal podcasting time, and I've thoroughly enjoyed just like obviously reconnecting, having conversations and learning about your journey and some of the nuggets that you've left and gems that I'm sure organizations that are thinking about how they build inclusive culture and also how they could potentially change their perspective and hire will really, really value. Is there anything, Cynthia, that you want to leave the audience with, whether that is your mantra, things that have inspired you, or anything at all that's on your mind right now?
I would love people to be aware that everything we do is open source, that this is actually, if there's a mantra that I try to live by and try to instill in the foundation, the idea is, learn and share. Because the more we share all of our learnings, all of our experience, the things that went well, the things that didn't go well, the more others can pick it up and use it, adopt it, change it into something else. And I think with that idea of open sourcing goes the idea of not being precious. It will change, it will become something else. The things that we've incubated and spun off will become something else, and that's okay. As long as we've been additive, I think that's the most important thing. So open source things, share everything you can, and make sure that you're additive.
Well, this has been a fantastic discussion. I've definitely learned tons because you've shared a lot. So I appreciate you living by that mantra. And I'm sure that this will be an episode that people are really interested in and get a lot from. So thanks for taking the time, Cynthia.
My pleasure. It's always fun to talk to you, Marcus.
All right. Cheers. Catch up soon.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye.